settling into your practice. And in maybe about 5 minutes, I'll just invite you into a reflection, a very brief reflection that could enter into the meditation this evening. And as you settle into the meditation, perhaps allowing a moment's reflection on what the purpose for your practice is these days. And it may be that it's the same purpose that you set out with when you started, but sometimes there's something about how things are happening in your life right now, or ways that your purpose has shifted over time. Just giving a few moments to allow yourself to let it bubble up in your mind. Perhaps at the end of the meditation or once during the meditation, just checking in and seeing how your purpose is reflected in how your mind is working with the process of meditation this evening.
So welcome, Sangha, and welcome to Insight San Diego, our Dharma Talk series. I know we celebrated the first day of summer, I think, this week, and it is kind of a small crowd. I'm going to point to that as maybe a reason why it's such a small group, but welcome to those of you that did make it. And smaller groups are nice because a little more intimacy and a little more connection with the teacher. And so we are happy to welcome Liz Powell. I'm going to read her bio. Liz has been practicing Vipassana meditation since 2004. She is currently in teacher training with Gil Fronsdale and Andrea Fella. She is a graduate of the Dharma mentoring training and local Dharma leader training programs with Gil and Andrea at Insight Meditation Center, as well as having completed the dedicated practitioners and advanced practitioners programs at Spirit Rock. For a number of years, she co-led programs at IMC for children, families, and parents, and served as IMC's board president. Currently, she co-teaches the Eightfold Path program, Introduction to Meditation, and serves as managing director for the Insight Retreat Center. She regularly offers day-longs, retreats, half-days of meditation, and practice discussions online, and takes joy in teaching IMC's Happy Hour on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. And I just want to interject here that if you haven't been on a retreat at Insight Retreat Center, it is an amazing place to sit a retreat. And the place itself is somewhat of a Dharma teaching. It's incredibly well organized. It runs like a Swiss clock, and there are no paid employees at all. Nobody's paid there. They're all volunteers. And somehow or another, the care and attention and compassion and loving kindness of the volunteers there is just really profound. I believe that's where I met you, Liz, sitting a retreat when you were managing. So before I turn it over to Liz, I also want to say a few words about Dana, which is the Pali word meaning generosity. And Liz, like many teachers in this tradition, does not get paid for events like these. She shares the Buddha Dharma out of generosity and is in turn supported by the generosity of the community. So this Dana practice of giving and receiving is how the Buddha's teachings have been passed down for 2,500 years. So if you would like to participate in that giving and receiving, there will be a link provided at some point during the talk. And you can go to that link. And Liz also mentioned that she would prefer that any donations go to her teachers or Insight Meditation Center or Insight Retreat Center, which are all Dana organizations. And if you go to that link, there'll be some drop downs where you can put Liz's name or Gil's name or the retreat center or the meditation center. So you'll see what I'm talking about. And just a couple words about housekeeping kind of stuff as a reminder. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the event unless you're asking a question or making a comment during the discussion period. And the talk and the discussion will be recorded. So if you prefer not to be on that recording, you can ask a question via the chat, and or you can turn your camera off. And but aside from that, I think that it's a much nicer experience for Liz to talk to actual people instead of blank screens or pictures, as lovely as they might be. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Liz, and thank you again so much for coming and offering this talk.
Yes, thank you, Irene, and thank you all for being here this evening. And those of you who are willing to be on camera, thanks very much. And if you're not comfortable, I'm okay with that too. And thank you also for any generosity that you extend to the Insight Meditation Center or Retreat Center or Gil Fronsdal or Andrea Fella, because they've really changed my life in the last 19 years. And I love this tradition that, you offer, Donna, and it gets recirculated. It goes to other people, and that they, want to support. And it's pretty amazing to participate in a system like that, which is so different than the way the rest of our culture tends to work. So this evening, I thought I would share, I'm very happy just to sit in meditation with you all, but I thought I'd share some reflections that they're kind of a collection of reflections on the Dharma life as an experiment. And whether you've been committed to the practice for a long time or you're newer to meditation, it's such a useful thing to touch briefly onto the reason that you're doing meditation on any particular occasion. It could be different for a particular meditation, or it could be that you've had a consistent purpose over time. And that's why I brought that up at the beginning of the meditation. But one of the things I have always loved about this practice is summed up by the Pali word ehipassiko, which is often translated as come and see for yourself. That's inspiring to me because I've learned over my lifetime to mistrust shoulds or sets of beliefs I'm supposed to have, or ways anybody says I'm supposed to feel. So in my prior experiences with other religions, it never felt quite right to me to accept something on faith, nor to have the feeling I was saying words I didn't feel about experiences I hadn't known for myself. So hence my enthusiasm for ehipassiko. And I want to acknowledge I do have Dharma friends whose practice has what is called a devotional quality. They naturally have faith. And if this is true for you, I want you to know I respect that very much. It's just that my experience has been different. And there's room for so many different ways to go about these practices that we do. I've learned a lot on my own, and it's often my experience and my thoughts are different from those of my friends, and we learn a lot from each other. So as a little background, in this practice, that I'm sharing this, and also in this practice, I love that we don't have to believe something because the teacher says it. Not even because it was passed down verbally for thousands of years or hundreds of years before the suttas were written down and then through suttas for thousands of years. We get to see what happens in our own lives and in our own meditations. And we get to hear what a whole variety of teachers have to say. And then try out what they're suggesting and see what works and what doesn't work. So another factor that's inspired what I'll share this evening is having been a really hard worker all my life. So I've tended for the first many years of engaging in meditation and mindfulness practices to be what's called an overstriver, to try really hard to make things happen or to feel like I just needed to work harder. So I had to keep dialing back the efforting over those years. And, for the first number of years, I would go on a retreat and I would spend so much time with the pain in my back or my shoulders, trying to find the right way to sit so that it wouldn't hurt, shifting my posture, doing yoga every morning and every night, trying to change myself in some way to make it go away. And what I would hear other meditators sometimes talk about getting blissed out or finding meditation so pleasant that they had to be careful they didn't drift off. I thought, what are they talking about? So if you're a blissful person, more power to you. I love to learn from that. But it was only after I encountered a retreat teacher who talked about infinite patience with the body, and another retreat teacher, Sally Armstrong, admonished us, don't be on pain patrol, she said. I'm like, oh, whoops, I'm on pain patrol. And I finally started taking an attitude of, I can be with this even if it lasts the rest of my life. That started to shift the mental reactivity that was unknowingly tensing up the body. So I'm wondering if any others here have had times of being kind of really serious and almost grim about your practice. It's sometimes so serious that it didn't feel so much like fun as an obligation, or maybe it's been more of a duty at times than something you looked forward to, or you knew on some level that life went better if you did daily meditation, but at times it has felt like when you were a kid and were told to eat the vegetable you hated the most because it was good for you. Occasionally, practice has felt that way. So, and some of us can be very hard on ourselves. It took me 4 years to sign up for a practice discussion with Gil, because I just kept thinking, well, I just need to sit and practice more. I just need to work harder. And I'd hear phrases occasionally like lighten up, or this is too important to be taken seriously. And I would think, you've got to be kidding me. So if any of this rings a bell, um, maybe you'll find some new inspirations this evening. And even if practice is rewarding to you and feels light and enjoyable, I look forward to later in this evening for all of us to learn from that when we do some sharing. But based on all the background I've just shared, I'd like to dedicate this evening to holding meditation and mindfulness in daily life together as a life experiment, where we get to try lots of different things, maybe even be joyfully or patiently curious, and even play a little as we experiment. Sometimes even be able to find humor in some of what we experience. And given that this is called the gradual path to freedom, and for many of us will be a lifelong pursuit, we might be able to find some ways to make it as enjoyable as we can. So I'll offer some practices I've found helpful over the years as I've learned from various teachers. So first of all, hearing this phrase, come and see for yourself, we might ask, see what? So one idea I picked up from reading suttas was that the Buddha was said to have sorted all of his thoughts according to a very simple metric. Is this wholesome or is this unwholesome? In other words, is this thought, action, or way of speaking bringing me closer to peace, or is it keeping me caught in stress, dissatisfaction, and suffering? And sometimes that's really obvious, but in other situations, we sometimes have to hang out with an experience, kind of see how it plays out, and notice how we feel and how it affects us, our relationships. We have to see it for a while before we really see whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. And a very interesting facet of that practice is that we don't have to rush to fix or change unwholesome thoughts, speech, and actions. What tends to happen over time is we learn more and more about it as we see it again and again. And sometimes we see certain behaviors for years that we know they're not that helpful, and yet we keep doing them. And what can emerge is that there's some part of it we haven't understood yet. From my own experience, I would hear the phrase, let go, and it really didn't make sense to me. I'm like, how do I do that? And it wasn't until I learned that there needed to be, it's easier for people to let go of a behavior that isn't working if we can let go into something more supportive or useful. So until I found something that was more helpful, the underlying need was still being fulfilled maybe in an unsatisfactory way, or with mixed result by an old, less helpful habit. But once I found that I could let go into something more supportive, then I started to begin to understand, I could watch an unwholesome pattern until I kind of got tired of seeing it. And it sort of let go of me when I became either thoroughly familiar with all the facets of it or disenchanted or bored by the results. So that's one kind of set of things that I found interesting to experiment with, is just spend a period of time, a day, an hour, 10 minutes, seeing as things come up, is this wholesome? Is this helpful to me? Or is this unwholesome? Another interesting way I learned to move closer towards freedom came in the form of daily life experiments that Andrea Fella, my other main teacher besides Gil, taught during non-residential week-long retreats that she would run. She called them daily life retreats. And she introduced this idea of these experiments we would do and ask us at the beginning of the week to declare what our experiments were going to be. And then we had a chance every day to check in about how it was going. So the first type of experiment I think she referred to as a mindfulness bell. And we'd pick one thing that we routinely do multiple times a day and see if we could use that event as a mindfulness bell each time it happened, to just pause and notice what was going on in the mind and body. What were we aware of in that particular moment? And so here are some examples of things different people used as mindfulness bells. Every time they looked at the time on their watch or their cell phone. Every time you stand up from a seated position. Every time you start an email. Every time you walk through a doorway. And by the way, we only picked one of these. We didn't do all of them, just one to do for a week. Every time you open a car door. Or a more advanced one turned out to be every time you became aware, awareness was back. Awareness was present. So any momentary thing can serve this purpose. And it's really interesting because as you undertake an experiment like this, at first, very often people would forget to do it even once during the first day. They just completely forget it. And then that recognition at the end of the day, like, oh, I forgot, would prompt a slight improvement the next day. Sometimes that day was about remembering an hour later. Oh, I forgot. When I got out of the chair, I was supposed to remember. And doing that then led to successive days when we might remember right after we forgot to do it. And then we would remember while we were in the middle of doing it. And finally remembering before we were supposed to, before I rose out of a chair, before I looked at the clock, I'd go, this is my mindfulness bell. And that process, it was actually really rewarding because it happened that not only was one able to notice more and more frequently, but also it started to make awareness of a lot of different things flourish. So awareness would just come up more during the day, more times. The second experiment Andrea encouraged us to try involved a brief chore that we did every day. The kind where, there was a little more longer period of time, but not too long, but the kind of thing where your mind would ordinarily have the habit of checking out and drifting into thinking or some other state of unawareness. So some examples are when you're brushing your teeth, or when you're driving to and from work, or when you're showering, or when you're washing the dishes. So the point was to remain aware, remain mindful throughout that activity and see what was noticed. So what those two types of daily life experiments helped build was more continuity of awareness, more continuous mindfulness. And when mindfulness is more continuous, the mind becomes clearer, more settled, and it starts to be able to see patterns of behavior that lead to suffering. And more awareness of those patterns lead to not getting caught so often. We'll start to those unwholesome habits will be observed enough that they start to fall away. And then the absence, for a while, there's just an absence, like, oh my gosh, I don't do that thing I used to do all the time that didn't feel that good. It's gone. And that absence of things is emphasized in Buddhist practice frequently. The absence of greed, the absence of aversion, the absence of delusion. And then that absence opens up the possibility that wholesome patterns can start to emerge, like happiness, contentment, peace. All these beautiful qualities can then arise. So some practitioners in our daily life practice retreats would choose to continue the mindfulness bell task and the daily chore task after the retreat. And in those situations, Andrea recommended that we change the task and the chore from time to time. So once we noticed that our mind grew so accustomed to it that it would no longer serve to wake us up, it was time to change the task or the mindfulness spell. And it's different for different people, but for some people, they needed to change it every week. Other people could do it for a little longer period of time. So doing those kinds of experiments actually brings some fresh injection of mindfulness into daily life practice that can be interesting, really interesting to see what happens. Another whole arena of inspiration for me was leading programs for kids and parents at Insight Meditation Center for a number of years. It was really fun to watch the various ways that kids interpreted what we were doing. And knowing that kids actually learn to model the world and learn about the world through play. Play is their method of conducting experiments to see how social interactions work, to see how the physical world works, lots of things. And we can learn something about practice from the way kids play. So I'll share a few. Not that you would necessarily want to do all of these, but one of the first things I noticed about kids was they don't have these inflexible definitions of what is used for what purpose that we do. You know, we get kind of fixed ideas, concepts that we get hardened around. So at IMC, I would set up a circle of zafus, one for every, these round cushions, one for every child and parent who was going to attend the group on the floor in a big circle. And what do you think a couple of enterprising kids did with that first? They saw the circle as if they were lily pads in a pond, and they leapt from one cushion to the next like frogs. So, by the time we're adults, we would never think of jumping around from cushion to cushion on a circle. But, for us, cushions are things to sit on or prop under one knee or something like that. And then at IMC, there's also an area of the floor that is raised like a dais. And I think when it was previously a Christian church, maybe the minister stood up there and offered the service. Maybe it had candles, flowers, a crucifix, a speaker's podium. But during our kids' meditations program, what the kids decided was that made the perfect launching pad from which to fling themselves onto the main floor, and maybe even attempting a somersault in the process. No one ever injured themselves, but you can imagine the kind of heart attack I had when I first saw them doing it. So, they interpreted everything differently. And then for a number of years, I offered a family retreat for the IMC families at a Zen center that's in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And of course, I asked the parents to sign liability agreements that warned about local hazards like poison oak, ticks, rattlesnakes, as well as the pond that was on the property, some distance down the path away from the center. And, said, of course, no kids will ever be allowed at that pond without a parent. At least one parent, even if there's a group of kids. So on one of the first retreats, after covering all those hazards and rules, Gil Fronsdal walked up to me maybe the first or second afternoon where I was engaged in preparations for the next event. And he I forget what it was. And he said, oh, there's a bunch of kids at the pond and I don't see any parents. So a parent was quickly dispatched, but Gil shared with me that the kids had decided that there was a small wood dock that the Zen Center had on one edge of the pond. Well, they completely untied that dock from the bank and they decided it would be the coolest raft. So they found long branches that had fallen and they pulled themselves out, standing up on this little floating wood platform to the very middle, the deepest section of the pond. And not long after that, one child returned to the camp, crying his eyes out, drenched to the skin and covered in green pond slime. And the minute he was showered and dressed in clean clothes, he was pleading to go back with the other kids to the lake and, play on the raft. So every retreat after that first one, the constant refrain from the kids was, to any adult in sight, was, would you go with us to the lake? Because they always wanted to play there. So these experiences taught me, what was happening was not that the kids were sitting like little Buddhas in meditation, although some kids actually did do that. They became used to the idea that a meditation center or a retreat was a comfortable, welcoming place that they could be themselves. And they could go from the morning meditation to an afternoon of playing outdoors. They could spend their evening doing mindfulness games. And the parents would share with me that their kids would then come up with little gems at home, like tell their parent at a stressful moment, maybe this would be a good time for you to take 3 deep breaths, or, things like that. And the parents who were at the center over the years told me their kids didn't often meditate, but when the parent was meditating, the child would come up and lie in their lap. And it seemed apparent they were comforted by the calm and quiet atmosphere that their parents developed. And I worked with kids in other contexts, and I can tell you that the parent having a meditation practice made a huge difference in the kids. The kids didn't have to be the ones doing the meditating. So we can actually invent our own mindfulness games, we adults. Some that kids do that are worth doing with any children in your life, or even doing by yourself, are interesting. Like they would mindfully blow soap bubbles simply by holding the soap wand near their mouths and breathing normal breaths or deeper breaths and seeing what happened. Or we would invite them to listen to the full sound of the meditation bell from the very first tone till they could no longer hear it, and notice as much about that experience as they could. Or we made prayer flags using fabric markers on squares of blue, white, red, and green and yellow fabric to embellish each square with kind wishes for the people and beings living in the neighborhood. And then the kids could hang it from the porch, and every time the wind blew, they could think of sending kind wishes to their neighbors. So, another way to get a snapshot of your mind and what its preoccupations are, I did recently on a retreat during a break. Inspired by childhood, I laid on my back and just watched the clouds go by in the sky. And I was really surprised to notice that every image I thought I saw in the clouds had totally to do with the things I was processing during the retreat, with, the mental preoccupations I had. So it's fascinating to kind of play in these ways that kids play, or to recognize how we get, fixed in certain ideas as adults that kids don't have. And we can, when we can just recognize that there are other ways to think about things, it can loosen up our practice quite a bit. If we face a conflict with another person, I've had the opportunity to observe over the years that even wonderful, honest, dedicated meditators that volunteer can have experiences where they have a completely different experience of something, a completely different interpretation to people, and they can be in conflict. And I know that each person is being completely honest about what they're experiencing, but because we carry so many concepts and filters, we are actually having different experiences than one another. And an experiment to try is, what if what they're saying is the way things are? Or what might all the different ways be that this, other ways that this is actually true, or that something else is happening here? And as I've done that, I've come to understand, when I went into being the managing director of IRC, I had a wonderful idealized view of the meditation center and the retreat center. And I learned that each person who comes there potentially has a totally different idea about it. And that things can be lots of different ways and be perfectly fine. So it really has helped loosen up my hardening of the categories. So these things, that I'm suggesting are just different ways we can think about our practice. Another antidote to our ways of getting too serious or too maybe blowing some fresh air into our practice is to do some meditation sittings or periods of walking mindfully outdoors. Feeling the pleasant sensations in the body that can arise, like relaxation, tingling, pulsing, the warmth of the sun on your skin, or the cool breeze touching your face, and just being aware where your attention is drawn. Sitting somewhere outdoors that, anywhere, and just watching what is received in the six senses, the five regular senses that everybody talks about, and then the sixth sense in Buddhism, which is thinking. And not trying to go out and look for experiences with the mind, but just see what is received, what is seen, heard, smelled, felt in the body, felt by the sense of touch, what arises in thinking. And then from time to time, to check in with what the attitude of mind is towards those experiences. Seeing if your relationship with what you're experiencing gives you any insights, or you see any patterns of stress or suffering or dissatisfaction. We can uncover that there's more of a tendency to notice the aversive experiences, perhaps not liking what is arising in the senses or in the mind, or dropping into fear and worry, or dropping into some kind of wanting or greed, like, oh, I need to plant flowers like that at my house. Maybe I should get a new wind chime. Let's take a vacation near a lake, just watching what the mind does. And it is so interesting that people experience patterns this way. So on a recent retreat, I learned a practice from Susie Harrington, who taught the retreat, called meandering. So you go someplace outdoors, and instead of taking a walk, you kind of allow the walk to take you by noticing, just standing and waiting and noticing the first thing that piques your curiosity, going and taking your time to look at it, listen to it, smell it, observe it, whatever comes to you. And you spend as long as you like until the next thing attracts your interest. So we were encouraged to, even if we wanted to be still the whole time, observing only one experience, or to have a number of them. And what I noticed was people came back from that sharing entirely different things. So some people noticed everything that their mind, kind of received was evoking a little bit of worry or a little bit of fear. And other people, it was totally pleasant, in sort of happiness provoking. And other people, just as many experiences as there were people. So these are ways to get to this all important tendency of the mind, how it relates to experiences we're having. Because that we're really here to uncover the tendencies in the mind that lead in the direction of suffering versus the ones that lead in direction of freedom from suffering. So noticing what draws our attention, what shows us these patterns. So this is, another set of ways that we can meditate in a new way and bring some inspiration into practice. There are so many ideas. We could go on with this, and I'm sure you're each, you each have your own potentially that are coming up or that you do. Another teacher shared one idea is to simply mentally note yes to everything that comes into awareness for a period of time. It serves as an acknowledgement of this is reality, and also helps us tap into how it goes differently when we radically accept just what's coming into awareness. Another practice that loosens up our attachment to concepts and gets us more attuned with reality. Instead of thinking everything we believe or think is absolutely correct, one way I heard Gil suggest years ago was when a thought would arise, that add, or maybe not, after every thought, idea, or belief. I'm the worst meditator in California, or maybe not, whatever it was, just adding or maybe not was really interesting in terms of loosening up this attachment to the way we think things have to be, which is a cause of suffering. So these are, a bunch of different directions that came to mind as I thought about our practice as an experiment, and experiments we can do in practice that help us see from a different angle where our minds have habits or conditioning that get us into stress, or that can continue to maintain patterns about everything. We have a tendency to identify with things about ourselves, things about others, and we can get stuck in relating to things based on ideas we have. I used to be a marriage family therapist, and when I would work with couples, very often I help them to see that people can make assumptions about their partner and never vary from that, not realize that you're changing and they're changing all the time, and you need to keep getting reacquainted with one another because stuff is changing. So there are these ways that we can get stuck in concepts, and there are ways that we can loosen that up. When we discover that we've seen something totally differently than someone else, a friend, a relative, a colleague, or a partner, we can start exercising a little more curiosity about what's really going on here. And I trust this person, but we're seeing things differently. So, I hope that these exercises in curiosity or in doing things a little bit differently are of benefit in some way. They bring in different experiences for you, or maybe they bring up questions or thoughts you have about your own experiences in practice. And we now have plenty of time to talk about what some of your inspirations have been, what some of your questions are, or any protests you have to what I've shared this evening, like, what is she talking about? Everything is welcome, because it's only by just being straightforward with what's coming up in our practice on this topic or any other that's coming up for you, by kind of sharing that in the group or by typing comments into the chat. we may get a chance to learn new things about our practice. So I appreciate that some folks have already put some inspirations in. One person shares surrender, stop trying so hard, to invite the question, who judges? Why not be honest and in the moment? And noting that unwholesome can be judging yourself. Why not ask why you think it's unwholesome or why you do it? Great idea. And the word unwholesome in Buddhism is not really meant to be self-critical as much as, is this pattern really leading me in a direction of freedom or leading me in a direction of suffering? But I love these questions. Thank you very much for sharing those, Carl. And anyone who would like can raise their physical hand or their Zoom hand. Molly, please.
Thank you, Liz. So it's interesting you're talking about the exercise of being aware, when you're doing things. Like I've tried to do that, like every time I transition, do this or do that. And what you really brought home was like sometimes you do these things just for the sake of doing them. Like, the point is that you're trying, as you said, see these patterns and what are these things that are reducing suffering. And so I feel like with my practice sometimes, I'm just doing it. I'm like very, goal driven to do these things, and I'm going to try to reach awareness, try to do that. And then I guess you do realize later, well, it does just lead to you feeling more at ease and kind of doing that. But anyways, my point is like, I really appreciated the way you tied it to that, because I think that I lose sight of that sometimes. So thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Molly. Yeah. It is amazing how we get into certain habits, and we can be hard workers. Maybe sometimes we work hard, so hard that it actually is more than we need to do. Other thoughts, other comments, experiences? And if you're not on screen, you're always welcome to unmute yourself and just start sharing. Giannina, please.
Hi, thank you. This is my first time at Insight Meditation in San Diego, so it was lovely to find you, because you are talking my language about wanting to bring the Dharma into my daily life. I have a daily practice of sitting, which has been so important to me. But then I go about my day and then I realize, oh, I'm on autopilot a lot. And so you're helping me see and remind myself again, like I can just, have my meditation bell of every time, I open the refrigerator or, get supper ready. Like that could be something that's easy, simple, manageable. And I still have my daily sit of 30 minutes. But for me, this daily life practice is where I really want to lean in, because like I said, autopilot, with awareness sprinkled in. So thank you for this Dharma.
You're very welcome. And, that is true for most of us. When we sit, we have a set of experiences. And then the question is, well, how do I bring that? How do I bring awareness or mindfulness into daily life? And for me, one of my main purposes for meditating was not for some future thing, but to live better every day, like to live a good life, to live in a good way. And so that's one reason I was drawn to Gil and to Andrea, because Gil used to practice what's called Soto Zen. And my understanding of that from a distance was that it was about everyday Zen. And Andrea practiced with a Burmese teacher named Sayadaw U Tejaniya, who emphasizes practice all the time. He says, I don't do mindful walking. I go for a walk and I'm mindful. So he kind of turned the practice on its head. But his idea is like, be aware all the time of everything. And the question that what Andrea did so skillfully is, how do you get there? Like, what do you do? So when she offered these experiments, and we could see how you started, you weren't able to do any of it. You skipped the whole first day, like you forgot to do any of it. But that over the course of a week, it built more awareness all the time. It was like, oh, that's how it can happen. Through little moments that then become more moments. Yeah. So thanks very much for your comments. Other experiences or questions, or like I said, protests?
Hi.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. Sorry, I had my camera off. I had a headache from staring at the screen too much today, so I'm just mostly listening with my eyes closed.
I'm glad you took care of yourself.
Yeah. But I think something I've been feeling while you've been talking pertains to this. I went on a trip with my friends, and I wanted to really practice while I was away on this trip with them. And I wanted to practice not judging, because going on a trip with a bunch of friends can be challenging.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be very mindful of how I reacted, during the trip to them. And I found myself reacting well, but kind of judging about some things in my own head, but not portraying that, trying to control my reactions, react in a better way. But I snapped at the very end. Like, on the last day, I said something out loud, and then I judged myself, because I thought, oh, well, you did really good, but at the very end, you just let that one thing get to you. And then goes, the judging of yourself, like, I shouldn't have reacted that way. So, this everyday practice of trying to be in the moment is really good. And I find it very challenging.
Yeah.
But it's a good practice.
It is. And I would say you took on one of the tougher challenges of traveling with other people. Can be really, everybody has different preferences and different rhythms, and practicing wise speech, like refraining from commenting on things, that's a really good practice. And, even if we catch ourselves in a moment of, irritation or reactivity, you saw that you started judging yourself and were hard on yourself. And that's less important than like, wow, after this whole vacation, I only made one comment. That's pretty darn good for wise speech, which is one of the most challenging things for most people to practice. So thank you for sharing that experience.
May I ask one more thing about
Oh,
that?
yeah, absolutely. Keep sharing.
How do you deal with, judging in your mind? You make judgments in your mind, but then I guess it's the practice. Then you choose what to say instead of reacting from your judgment.
Right.
That's really hard practice for me.
It is a very hard practice, and you've already identified the elements. So one is, if you can become aware, oh, judgment is coming up, and you see it coming up, you don't judge the judging. You're just like, okay, I've over my lifetime, this kind of situation has produced this kind of reaction in me, and I see it right now. I'm judging. And then when we've seen it long enough, like sometimes we'll see after we've had a judgment and we've unleashed a comment, we'll see it afterwards and we'll go, ooh, okay, that didn't work out really well. And sometimes it takes a number of times of observing it. I mean, it can take a lot of time. It depends on the habit, but we observe it and we see the consequences. And then eventually our mindfulness is strong enough that we see the judgment come up and we're like, okay, then we can develop to a level that we have this choice that you mentioned. Like, okay, I have a choice. Do I say something right now or do I not say something right now? And sometimes we may actually want or need to say something, but we can let that kind of experience pass by a few times before we summon, like, what would be the way to say this kindly, or what would be the way to address this? So there are these developmental phases almost with the thing that you're talking about. So it is a challenging practice. And I already hear that you've made a lot of progress with it, just to identify, to notice it, to identify a judgment, and then to have the choice not to act on it. That's fantastic. And even if sometimes something is so strong that you react to it, you then just see what the aftermath is for you. And you saw, oh, my mind then judges me really harshly. These are all really great experiments. This is a great way to learn.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What are ways any of you have that you find you keep your practice fresh, or you have inspirations that help you navigate, change, or any experiences that you want to share that you've done that have been helpful to your practice? Or, things you've tried that you realized didn't work, or anything you'd like to say? Yes, please, Irene.
Thank you, Liz.
Oh, sorry. Hugh, can you hang on for a sec? I was going to ask Irene to share, and then I'm going to ask you to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. So I just got back from almost an identical trip as Debbie. That was very validating to hear that. I spent most of my vacation time vacillating between judging them and judging myself for being so judgy. So anyway, but the question I have, or comments I have, I guess, are, my goal is to be able to practice in the way that Sayadaw U Tejaniya teaches, with just sort of the being mindful all the time and kind of the receptive awareness instead of some kind of technique. But I have a very controlling mind, and it's just so difficult to not, I've for years I've used breath meditation, like an object of meditation, and that's really helped to calm my mind down. But as soon as I won't say as soon as, but oftentimes when I move off that object or let it recede into the background so that I can try to have more receptivity to other objects, it'll either just go, it's kind of like daydreaming, or just, jumping from one thing to another, usually just thoughts. And so I guess it's just trying to find a balance of the right effort to put in. So oftentimes what I end up doing is going back to the object until I get some mindfulness, and then kind of letting it recede and back and forth and back and forth. And I guess that's a good way to do it. I'm just wondering if you have any other ideas about that.
Well, that's a really good question, because many of us are trained to meditate with an object. And actually that serves a purpose over time, right? It stabilizes the mind. And I know for me, I needed body scans for a long time before I could do anything else, because it was really stabilizing. It was really centering. So what you're doing, going back and forth, is certainly one way to work with it. Another way is to let go of the breath meditation and let the mind be kind of all over the place, and just try as much as possible to identify what's going on. Maybe even using, really quiet mental noting, like, mind is drifting, or, jumping around, distracted, and with, to try to do it as kindly as possible, because it takes getting used to this receptive awareness where, if some of us may be more inclined to be concentration, or types that, kind of can settle easily on one thing. And we find that flow of things challenging because it's maybe not something we're as used to. And for other people, it works the opposite way. They find the flow of things very easy, and they find sticking to one practice difficult. But if you allow that, at first, it's just unfamiliar. So it's going to be wild at first. And you just try to cultivate the habit of noticing each thing, like, okay, distracted mind, with great kindness, mind jumping around, breath, breath getting really tense. And then, so that's one avenue, is just let it fly and be with it for longer periods of time, and just see if you can notice each thing, or note something about it, and get used to the way that it feels different. The second way is the second support is to perhaps acknowledge the purpose that focus has served. Like, sometimes you say, controlling, my mind is controlling. And I think many people do that because that has been a source of safety, or it's been a way of making life work out well. We've been rewarded for using our minds in that way, often at work. We're very much rewarded for keeping everything under control, right? So we have habits that have been reinforced and conditioned, and there have been very good reasons for those habits. And as we, start to change or try new things, to be able to honor the purpose that served, or the area where it's strength. Like I say, at work, for me, I had an earlier career as a graphic design manager and a designer. And the thing was to make sure everything turned out perfectly. Like, you didn't want any errors in anything when you were doing work for a client. So being really hyper controlling and vigilant was part of what you got paid for. And so that was useful for that purpose. But then when it came to doing some other task, maybe it wasn't so useful. So I'm wondering how these suggestions are landing for you so far.
Oh, yeah, totally landing. Yeah, Amita Schmidt gave a Dharma talk, I don't know, about a month ago, and she talked about viewing the thinking mind as, she's also a therapist, and she is into internal family systems. And so she was talking about viewing the mind as a protector part. And that was really helpful too. So yeah, it's totally landing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and I just want to encourage you to keep at it, because it is it's a big shift to try this other form of practice. But maybe the experiments will help you too. If those resonate for you, to try some of the daily mindfulness bell or something like that gives you a way to touch into a little different experience. Or you do the receptive awareness for a brief period. Like, you go sit for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and just receive what is coming in, even if it feels a little chaotic. And then maybe the next time you do it for 20 minutes, you just expand it a little bit at a time, and you treat yourself with great compassion and kindness during it as much as you can, because the mental habits we've developed have served us well until now. They've done something for us, or we wouldn't have done them. And we're just trying to expand our vocabulary sometimes, or our ways. So thanks very much for asking the question. Okay, Hugh, please.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sangha. I just love this idea of experimenting with our life, and of seeing it as a a fascinating game, almost like an improvisation or a sadist or um, im- a collective creation that happens in every present moment, and that is just, like a box of chocolates, never know what you're going to get, and just, and with each, and just it, um, enjoy all the different flavors without uh, try not to judge any of them, but say yes to them and to play with them, to say, okay, this is the present moment that I'm inheriting, and it's a beautiful gift. Oh, how can I play with it? Like what? How can I um, add something wholesome to this moment, or how can I give this moment a little bit of sugar? And the and to just kind of um, feel free or to play and make new friends. The I think this opens up for me the the feelingful side of my mind, my heart mind. That my heart mind likes to my heart likes to feel warm, and to have feelings for people and animals, trees, everything. All those they all feel good experiences, and why I like to go with that, to lean into that and and um, be like a good playmate or a good friend to the moment, the it I think am not too afraid to do that, because I know I can always call on my thinking mind to come in if I need it. It's available as sort of a sidekick, that I can, if I'm not sure how a situation is evolving, I can um, take a half step back and consult with my thinking mind, you know, and because I have all these 82 years of experience, to bring to my into the game, into my boyish playfulness, that makes me feel a little more secure and comfortable to play, to relaxed enough to enjoy a game, a creative game. Those are my thoughts. Thank you, Liz.
Thank
Bringing them
you.
up.
Yeah, those are wonderful thoughts. I love this idea that no part of us needs to be left out. That you're, raising, that the thinking mind can do different things for us than the feeling part, the joyful, childlike part. They can all do something different for us. And also, what you brought up brings to mind that it took me a long time to realize that there was a role for pleasant feeling in meditation, and also a role for imagination. That it actually, I was such a hard worker that the idea that, I could foster something pleasant, or that I could go with that, my mind didn't work that way. And then over time, I started to realize that actually is reinforcing, that makes this an experience you want to do. And the experimental mind is one that has helped me go, oh yeah, okay, this is really interesting. It's not just a task. It's not just a duty. This is kind of interesting what's happening as a result of this experiment. Or look at what these kids are doing. It's so fun compared to the way we, as adults relate to this stuff. So yeah, wonderful, Hugh. Thank you so much. Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, there's no part left out. The thinking mind has gotten us a long way, and we can't abandon it. We do need to do a certain amount of thinking to live in our culture and to have a life that works. So, I've heard teachers often say, we're not trying to stop thinking altogether. We're just trying to be wise about our relationship to all these things, to learn some wisdom.
I had and I did lose my thinking mind altogether for a number of years due to a head injury. I had a subdural hematoma, a large one, on the left side of my brain, and it really shut that thinking mind off, turned it off. I just, all I had was, my right hemisphere, and I felt pretty good about that because my right hemisphere likes to play. It's where my intuition lives, and my feelings of the present moment. I believe it's where the present moment happens, but so everybody around me for a few years was, gave me a lot of pity, like, oh, you poor man, you can't think, all you do is feel, and it was very emotional, but but mostly it was a wonderful experience. I really liked it. As my left brain, now I've been in many, many years of rehab, over a decade of rehab, and I have access to my left brain now. But for the first few years, as it began to come back, I was resistant to regaining access to it. I didn't like. I was relearning. Oh yeah, I can judge things. Oh yeah, I can measure stuff. Oh yeah, I can work out details of a math, problem. My attitude towards regaining those powers was, who wants that?
The playful part of you was really having its day, huh?
But now, thanks, my teachers have advised me, you need to have access to that, because, like, I got myself in a lot of trouble just running around without, judging anything, just going with my feelings. And I would occasionally get involved in difficult situations, But so I need that. I have to be able to provide a kind of counterbalance to my happy right brain. I have to think a little bit,
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. There are these ways. I mean, you went through it through an injury, but each of us is trying to work on more balance in a way between the various capacities we have. And one of my favorite stories of how somebody overcame a very difficult period in his life is the story of, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud worked together. And then Sigmund Freud and Jung had sort of a breakup or a rift. And what happened after that was Carl Jung spent a long time just playing on the shores of Lake Geneva, and in the process supposedly invented play therapy. But that was how he healed from this inordinately painful rift that developed with his close colleague. And, a lot of us as adults get overdeveloped on the side of the thinking brain, and we leave the play behind. And then, some people have a lot of play, and maybe they're overdeveloped in that area, not developed enough in the balance with thinking or, analysis or whatever those other skills are. But practice in a way is restoring as much flexibility to us as it can, where we can meet each moment as it changes instead of remaining fixed in some set of habits. So I love the story that you shared. Thanks very much. Well, I very much appreciate this. I've appreciated this opportunity to meet you. And thank you for supporting my learning process in offering this. And I hope to see many of you again, whether it's at Insight Retreat Center or anywhere that we encounter each other on the path.